Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are in the world. You are here live with us. Today we are joined by Rian Rietveld. We also have Peter Nelly. We have Jan Koch and myself, Lee Jackson. Today we are going to be talking about being successful with accessibility, but I'm going to say no more because this is a huge passion project for both Rian and for Peter. So Peter, today I shall hand over to you for you to host. Before that, folks, if you're watching the replay, let us know by tapping in the word replay. If you're watching this live, accessibility is ridiculously important. We'd appreciate a share. Peter, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Rian. Thank you. We checked. So we're very happy that we can say Rian's name without mistakes. So it's so great to have you here. So
did I nail the name?
Yeah, you're doing better than I am, actually, I think. Yeah.
Rian.
Anyway, I've seen you, Rian, in the days when we were still able to roam around the world. I was always at WordCamps and always catching a talk by you on accessibility. And you are so good at that. You're so good at divulging, making accessibility accessible, pardon the pun, but it is actually the way it works, isn't it? I think that a big part of your work is making accessibility accessible, because a lot of people think that it's quite difficult to get things to be accessible, but I don't think so. Anyway, before I digress way too much, tell us a bit about you and how you got here. Why? Because as Lee said, I am passionate about accessibility in the sense that I am on a learning journey. I am by no means there. I'm always checking. I'm never sure. Well, I'm sort of getting more and more sure that my websites are doing well in terms of accessibility, but I do feel passionately that I want everyone to understand that we need to be accessible and inclusive when we build things. So how did you get to become an accessibility expert? What's the journey? How did you get there?
Well, I used to be a WordPress developer a long time ago. And I had a lot of clients and a lot of work. But in the Netherlands, this is about 10 years ago, all websites from the government needed to be accessible. And I thought, that's a lot of work. And I started training myself in accessibility. There's in the Netherlands the Accessibility Foundation, and I followed courses, got certified, and then the work followed. And then I met people that actually need accessible websites. I built a website for the Dutch Eye Association, and they use content managers that are blind. And then I started to see how actually people use the web when they are blind or have a disability. And then I kind of got a bit angry because the WordPress CMS at that time wasn't that accessible. So I started to study and see, well, okay, how can we improve this? And then I discovered there was an accessibility team. So I joined that, and we tried to get the CMS and also the front-end teams more accessible. And then you learn and you meet people and they want to know stuff. And then I started to give presentations, and well, it kind of went from there. It first was a business decision, and after that it was really something I thought that needs to be addressed. So that was my journey, and that's what I'm doing here. I work now for Level full-time on accessibility.
So there's a couple of things there, because when we think about accessibility, what is accessibility in a nutshell? Because you mentioned that you're a WordPress developer, and I think that a lot of people think that accessibility is, getting the typography right, which is part of it, but there are so many sides to accessibility. What is it? What are the main aspects of it?
Accessibility is like very broad, as you said. It's the aim is to make the web work for everyone, not only for people who are healthy and young and bright, but also for people who are not that young or are not that bright or have some kind of disability. It's like an umbrella for everyone needs to be able to use the web. And that's quite a task, but it's totally doable. Yeah, what was the question?
Sorry, it's my fault. It was a bit of a confused question, perhaps. So no, because when you were talking, I was thinking, okay, so there's definitely a side, accessibility from the technical side, but also accessibility from the front end side. Yeah. There are many sides to it, and it's interesting how you approached it as a developer first, but then I know from the various talks that I've seen from you that you also, you deal with the front end as well. And I think that
one misunderstanding is that accessibility is for blind people. And that's not true. It's much larger. Accessibility is also for people who cannot use a mouse, or for people who have an anxiety disorder. Like if you have a form and you don't know what comes next. Some people don't dare to fill out the form. That's also accessibility. So it's much. There's many aspects on it, and well, the definition is like everybody should be able to use the web.
My daughter has a condition where when she looks from left to right, her eyes skip, which means when she looks at certain numbers, they can look different. So a 6 can look like an 8. And I can't remember how it works anyway, because we were trying to work out why she was struggling with maths, but also struggling with reading, and again getting quite frustrated and quite upset, and the anxiety disorder there as well was coming into that. So she was really struggling at school, and we actually went to the opticians to find this out. So it's actually so much more broader than we could possibly imagine, isn't it? There's hearing, obviously sight, and I'm so glad you raised anxiety and everything. Carry on, guys. Sorry, just wanted to throw that one in.
Yeah, no, we are not all the same, and people use the web on many different ways. Some people have a straw in their mouth and they press keys. And we lived indoors for 2 years now almost. So online shopping become more and more important, that you can order online because you cannot go to the shop. Some people with a disability always stay at home, so they are really depending on the web working well. So for them, it's even more important that the web works well because they are depending on it, because for their way of living. And we are just nagging, so we can go to the shop, but we will be able later. But those people have to stay at home, for example, and when the web works well, it liberates them from being depending from other people, because now they can order, if a website of a web shop is accessible, they can order themselves. It buys them freedom. So that's also an important aspect of accessibility.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Lee, matters particularly because a lot of people think that accessibility is not something that's relevant to them or to their audience even, but it really doesn't take very much to realize that we are surrounded, but there are permanent disabilities, but there are also temporary disabilities. And you quoted your daughter, you just found out it's a very specific thing and can be very small, but then it causes huge issues for her, quite understandably. But even both of you, Lee and Jan, have a small child that you hold in your arms. You can't use a mouse at that point. So
and I need to watch videos without the sound on, so I need to rely on subtitles.
Exactly. That's one. If that happens, there are so many situations. So it's quite funny that not that long ago, Jan, you said, I don't know how accessibility is relevant to me on an everyday basis. And my immediate reaction was, it is both for you and for whoever is,
Yeah. Well, that's also coming from a perspective that I'm not building websites day by day anymore. So that's why I'm not involved in accessibility as much as I was in the past. There is a question I have though, Rian, that I would love to get your thoughts on. Is when we are starting a new website project, and we want to make sure that accessibility is involved right from the beginning, and that not just we as developers have accessibility in mind, but also we need to educate the clients on why accessibility is important and what are the benefits for them. How do we start a project on the right foot with that then?
Well, you start with the first conversation you have with your client. Like you explain that you think accessibility is important. What we with Level do, we just take it into the whole package. We build a website responsive, safe, fast, and accessible. And you don't have to pay extra for this. It's just part of the package you get. We want to build like a good product, good product with a good quality. So all those elements are included. Then you talk with your client like, okay, you have branding guidelines. Show them. Can we use them for text, or maybe not for text, but for graphical elements only? And then you start with the design or the wireframes. Maybe you can have wireframes and you let them test by someone with a disability, like is the order logical, is the workflow okay? And after that, the design, you can check the design for the order of the elements, you can check the design for color contrast, and then you start developing. And after that, you do Q&A and you check if the whole package is accessible. During the time, all those people involved need to have training. They need to have the proper knowledge of what they are doing. And also at the end, the client needs to get training in, for example, how to fill out text, how to do the content management, how to make proper headings, look up proper links. So we also give a workshop to clients after the website is put into is delivered. We give them how to give them we give them a training for the content. Yeah.
Do you find that clients appreciate?
Training is important, that you give the people involved good training.
Yeah. Do you find that your clients appreciate that focus on accessibility, or is it more like it's a little bit of an annoyance because it might delay the project and only so few people will really benefit from it from the client's perspective?
Well, what we explain is people spend a lot of time on SEO, on conversion, or research on how to get as much people to their website. They spend a lot of money on that. And if then 20% of those people cannot use the website and leave, that's a huge waste of money. Because all those people come to the website and leave, and you invested so much money in them coming to your website. That's such a, it's a pity. So you have a higher conversion. People can fill out forms better. People. One thing is there was one website when they had a telephone. People could call for service and questions. And when we made their website accessible, they get like half of the amount of telephone calls because people can find the answers on the website better. That's a huge cost saver because they have less people. They need less people to answer the phone.
Yeah.
So it can be like if a client wants a big slider and something moving videos and all kinds of things moving around and pop-ups and things. It's also bad usability and bad UX. And
so you just slap them in the face 3 times and explain why it's a bad idea.
You cannot use a slider. A slider is not a good idea.
For so many reasons, it's not 100% agree.
Yeah, sometimes sliders in another website, and they really, really like that. And we have to convince that maybe that's not such a good idea. Yeah, and then
sliders
usability like mixed together. Yeah.
And I remember I have one last question before I hand it over to my dear colleagues again. I remember that I think Domino's in the US has been sued because their website wasn't accessible. Are there some forms of laws and like the minimum standards for accessibility that we as agencies and developers should be aware of?
Well, it depends per country. In the EU, we have legislation for government websites, and next year there will be legislation for large public websites and web shops. But there are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and in the US, you have to stick to 2.0 AA. So you have 3 levels. A is basic, AA is the global standard, and AAA is for really dedicated websites. And the latest version is 2.1. In the EU, you have to stick to WCAG 2.1 AA, and in the US to 2.0, but I think they will move to 2.1 too. And that's guidelines with all kinds of success criteria, like you have to have alternative text with your images. Now,
that would rule out most of my past clients already. They never cared about those things. And it was probably on me because I didn't educate them to fill that out.
Yeah, Jan,
Well,
you should have.
Yeah,
I think
shame on me. Shame
yeah,
on me.
but I think that, I mean, I hope also that accessibility is what responsiveness used to be years ago. You know, responsiveness was sort of patched on, and now you wouldn't dream of building anything that isn't responsive. And so my hope, is that it will be baked in the process.
Yeah.
Because it should be really, because harking back to a few things that you said, Rian, there's if you back to the question of how to get started the right way, the thing is that if you apply principles of good design and good UX, chances are that you're already halfway there with accessibility. I think that you do have to go a little bit deeper, because it's more than just making the type size big enough or getting the contrast right. But if you start with that, I think that you already are there. And that's why I think it's so important that agencies actually are trained in, that agencies make the investment of training their teams in good design, good UX, good accessibility, accessibility. There's no good and bad accessibility, because that will make their task, I feel, much easier. And also back to something that you said, Jan, I'm picking on you today. So, but you said, I don't re-say anything, because you said that you're not building websites right now, and that's why accessibility is less of a, concern, let's say, for you. But the point is that even you're not building websites, but you are producing so much content on a daily basis, and so accessible content is very important. Isn't it, Rian? I mean, it's not just the website that you build, it's also how you present content that needs to be accessible.
Yeah, and all the content should be available for everyone. So if you have content on an image, you have to give it an alt text. Or for example, if you have a video, you have subtitles. But also, if something happens in the video that's only visible, you can have an audio track with someone explaining from now the door opens and the person comes in, for blind people, to give them extra information what's happening on the video. Yeah, it is. Content is really the web, I think, and it should be available for everyone.
Yeah, Peter, I have to counter you on that. With the podcast that I'm doing, every podcast episode gets at least 2.5 to 3,000 words in transcriptions, and not just word for word, but I am rewriting that so that it's a readable article rather than just a word for word AI transcription.
Excellent.
But that's precisely why I'm picking on you, because I know it's not true. I know that accessibility matters to you.
I'm going to challenge you all. I've got a challenge for you all, and it's actually a question for Rian. So I've got this podcast, and I have assumed that transcriptions are the way to go, just as Jan has. But I would counter that I don't really believe they're readable, because it does depend on the guest. If it's just me doing a solo episode, it's very often readable because I've kind of planned a script. I've got a script, so it's going to be fairly readable. But when it's a conversation like this, we change our thought process, don't we, mid-conversation? And reading that is actually very difficult. I can hear it, but I can't hear that in the words. And I started to recognize that for myself as a podcaster, my own transcripts are literally everything verbatim. And I wondered, am I causing an issue for people who have to read that because it makes less sense? But also, what other mistakes might we make kind of across the board, be it video, be it with websites, where we pay some form of action towards accessibility, but we don't do a full enough job? That's kind of where I'm wondering.
Yeah, you have to put yourself in the place of someone who uses the web in another way. So if you cannot listen to the podcast, the transcript must be like giving the impression about what you were saying, and rewriting it to make it something better readable. I think that's a good idea, but it's also a lot of work. Yeah.
You're on mute, Peter. Oh, you're back.
Yeah, I was on mute. There's a woman who transcribes our podcasts, and when it's a podcast, not podcast, these webinars, and when it's 3-4 people, she says, the software that she uses goes mad, and so does she, because it's really hard to make it all work. But still, it's completely worth it because it makes the content so much more valuable. And that's also a way, I think, that this is where SEO comes in, because obviously if you make a piece of content accessible, you make it more available and you make it easier to find. Is that not the case?
Yeah.
Rian?
Yeah. If you really add text, written text, well, that's searchable, that's indexable by Google. So accessibility and SEO have a lot in common, because the search engines also depend on really the content of a website, the text alternatives, the transcripts, how the structure of a website, if headings are really logical, representing the content below, then Google can index a website much easier if the website is well built and the text is written well with a good structure. So blind people have a lot of advantage of that, but yeah, Google is deaf and blind. So if you offer all that information as an alternative, Google can also index it. If a website is very slow, so that's really annoying, but you could also be punished by Google by not being indexed so high if your website performs bad. It's a bad experience for your user, but it's also you're being punished for that. So building really good websites, accessible websites, will benefit you also in your Google ranking, I think.
Who had thought that Google is deaf and blind? Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. It's so true. Google is deaf and blind. So if you want to up your SEO game, be accessible and think that Google is deaf and blind. What a great, I hadn't thought about it.
I think it's not my quote, but don't quote me on that, but it's a common quote in the accessibility world.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So
I actually have a story about that. One of the students I have in Visual Summit Mastery is blind, or at least visually impaired, and she cannot see very well. And we built a really good relationship via email because she appreciates the podcast that I've launched quite a bit because it's very easy for her to consume. And it also paid off monetarily already because she is already a student in the main program, and all the bonuses that I'm working on, that I'm selling now, she bought them because she now knows how much I care about the audience. And this is kind of like, I think it makes business sense, but it is also a lot of work to do this stuff.
Yeah, but like everything, I think you need to have a system. Once you have a system, it becomes much easier. And then I think after a while, you wouldn't dream of putting up a video that isn't transcribed. I just don't put it up. I just don't post a video if it doesn't have a transcription. And it just makes it so many more people watch it. And, I see it happen on LinkedIn all the time. If you look at videos that don't have captions, I basically don't watch them. as soon as a video has captions, I watch it, because we're always doing a million things at the same time, especially if you have two big screens like me. So you're demanding my undivided attention if you were asking me to actually watch a video. If it has captions, I can skim through it in a way. Do you know what I mean? So you're helping out the common misconception that it only applies to someone who's deaf. No, it doesn't at all.
I think that there's a percentage, about 75% of all people are not deaf that actually watch captions. I put on captions because English is not my first language. So I really like captions. So I've got a confirmation from my eyes and from my ears what's being said. So I understand the text much better.
It's a great language learning tool as well. Captions are amazing to learn languages. It's so important. So I think that the business sense side of it is really, it will become so obvious to clients, let's call them clients, to people that, you know, pay us to do stuff for them, to build stuff for them. It will become so obvious that they need to do it. And actually something that comes up in LinkedIn a lot, because I watch it. There's a few people that produce videos all the time. They never do captions, and I never watch them. And I'm trying to tell them really in the nicest way possible that they should really consider that. And I think I managed today. I think I made a roadway today. That yeah. So. But the forms thing that you were saying, Jan, I think that forms are another thing that's so important and very, very often not considered. We all have forms. Anybody who has a website has a contact form, even the simplest contact form. And so you don't think twice, do you? You just have it there, and whatever is just a form. And I think that, well, I know that there is so much more to a simple form than meets the eye. And I know that you did a big project with Gravity Forms, Rian, specifically about forms. And I'm sure that there are so many sides to forms that people don't consider.
Yeah. First of all, don't hide the label. I think designers like really clean and empty. But for a form, you need to have really information to give the user how to fill it out. And if you have just a very light gray placeholder, people have to stare from what's there, that's not a good way to make a form. It looks very stylish, but it's not very usable. Dus having a real good label, like clear, what do you need to fill out? And also, if people forget to fill something out, give good error messages explaining. So van your error of your form hasn't been submitted, there is an error. Well, explain what was the error or what someone forgot. So be informative in forms. Not very clean, not very empty, but help the user as much as you can, because you want people to order with you or to subscribe to your newsletter, to be informative. And also try with your keyboard. If you can fill out a form, tabbing through a form, if that works with the keyboard only, you can use the tab key for that, to go from focusable element to focusable element. A lot of forms fail with that. Because, well, in the web we have HTML. That's where the web is built from. Most people come from schools and they think divs and spans are what the web is built from, and that divs and spans with JavaScript handles doesn't work with the keyboard, or you have to add a lot of extra stuff to it. So there are input fields, there are buttons, there are real labels, there are field sets, there are checkboxes, there are really elements in the web, in HTML, that are used for forms. So use them, and then they work out of the box with the keyboard. So that's the main pitfalls, like not being informative, not really decent error messages, and also building stuff not with real HTML elements.
So that's one side of accessibility that's about development and not about the front end, but and that's really important.
Yeah, well, sometimes designers are really trying to invent the wheel and make a form like so flashy, and everything is like in boxes, and you cannot recognize what a form control is. So some blame is for the designers, the others for the developers.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but designers need to know, any designers in the audience, you need to know that you need to at least have some, you don't need to be able to code necessarily, but you need to have some understanding of how the web works, because otherwise you make these mistakes.
For a web developer, I think that's essential that you need to know how the web works. Like, learn HTML, please do.
Yeah.
Invest in that.
Yeah, because this is something else that I say all the time, and I'm sure people have heard me say it before, but I'll say it again because it's so funny to look at awards websites like the AWWW awards website, such an awkward website to mention. Anyway, it's a design awards website, and when you go on it, you see it's I'm going to write it in the chat so Lee can, I think this is it, awards.com. Anyway, it's so funny to go and look at these websites that they give awards to, and they look amazing, and the creativity in it, and the even technical prowess is amazing. They're completely unusable. Most of them are entirely inaccessible. And as a designer, I used to be a purely creative designer. So when you move to the web, the first instinct is to go, wow, I can make things move. I can do, I can do so many things with it. And then you learn that really you shouldn't. In fact, not only you shouldn't, you must not do that. And making, and these are people that probably don't stop and think that div and spans are not a good thing because they can't be used, you can't use them with a keyboard. They just, because they don't know. So they lack that training. So, and that's why, the web is so much more of a complex place, because when I used to do different types of design, it wouldn't have occurred to me that I needed to make it readable. If you do creative design, it's a completely different kettle of fish. And
well, what I also tell designers, you're not creating art.
You're not.
You are making a website that people need to use. So you can make it pretty, you can make it beautiful, but it's not art. And that you have to explain to designers when you are not completely free in what you do, because people need to understand how the interface works. And that's sometimes a conflict. And that's what happens in the www.awards.com. That's art. That's art, and not really functional websites.
Exactly. They're not functional. They are frustrating as hell to use, even for able-bodied people. Anyway, it's always interesting because I admire them. I find there's a lot to admire, but at the same time, it's they're not usable. So that was a big lesson learned for me as a designer. But you said something else, that's back to the forms thing. Another thing to bear in mind is that sometimes people are using forms in a stressful situation, and you need to make them as easy as possible. And I'm saying that because last week I lost my phone while in transit, and I had a flight to catch the next day. I was not in the country where I live in. So I was in a really stressful situation, and you need to fill forms in that situation. And the error messages are bound to make you, oh my God. And I was particularly stressed out with Google and Apple, actually. But again, the language that you use is absolutely essential. And to me, there are two things that are super frustrating with forms. Is when they ask you to put in an email, and you're inputting your email, and at the first character it goes, that's not a correct email address. I'm like, no, I know it's not. Please, let me finish. So that's one thing. And then the other one is the really abrupt, the error message is going, you went wrong. And I'm like, no, maybe you didn't explain what, the unhelpful message. And this is user experience, people. This is UX. The UX of copy is so important. And again, we're back to accessible content. This also, would you agree, Rian, is this is accessible, is part of accessibility, isn't it?
Yeah, clear error message, clear workflow, like you know what you can expect, and yeah, that's all accessibility, and their usability and UX and accessibility really come together. Like you have to help the user to fill out a form as good as you can, instead of just confusing them or making them unsure about what they're doing. And if you have like an error message that's only a red border and someone is colorblind, they cannot see the red border. So they have no idea which form control is wrong. So yeah, give words, give text, give explanations, and help them. Yeah.
There's, for instance, and back to the fact that this is actually good design and how they, as you were saying, it all mixes together, which is something else that I always say, don't I, Lee? Good design is good marketing, is good UX. Is good, but
you do. I've stolen that and tell many people that as if I said it.
I'm definitely not my copyright. I'm definitely not the only person to say it, for sure. I do not, I do not claim a right to that concept. But there's one specific designer that I follow on Twitter who does wonderful threads about good user interface design. And the other day he had a really I bookmarked it. I'm a lurker on Twitter. He's back! Hurrah!
Yay.
My PC just decided to shut down on me.
Wonderful. Well, great UX as well. So
maybe time to get a Mac.
Anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But I was saying that, and he talks about how to build a user interface, and that's exactly the things that he was pointing out. How to build a form. And I find that actually forms are the most, in my experience, the clients, when you have to give them a form, it's like, yeah, whatever, form, just do it. And the thing is that it's the other way around. It's actually something that you should give some thought about, because it's your main way of interacting with your customers, especially if you're a small business that has a contact form. Have you thought about things like that? Have you thought about the error message? Have you thought about how it's communicated? And also, have you thought about things like, don't ask me don't make the surname compulsory, because in some cultures there isn't a surname. That's something else, isn't it?
Yeah, and also don't ask too much. Only ask what you really need to know. In Europe, if you ask, for example, for someone's race, no one will fill out a form. I saw that in the US. It's like quite common. Well, what's your religion? What's your race? And in the Europe, like that's no go. Absolutely not. So you have to consider what you need to know, and don't ask anything else, because it will maybe block people from filling out the form. For why do I need to give that information? If you have to give like a date of birth, explain why. Why do you need my date of birth? So that's also where communication, like explain why you need some kind of information. Like if you order something and it has to be delivered to your house, well, it's logical that you have to give your house address. But if that's not the case, maybe you don't need the house address of someone. So consider what you ask.
Isn't that also part of GDPR? That you're not collecting unnecessary information?
Yeah, so see how everything plays in together again. So be legal and you'll probably be accessible. That's another thing. And please don't ask me.
I wouldn't give GDPR that much credit.
No. Actually, from the point of view of UX, the GDPR has made our lives so much worse, especially on all the windows that you have to shut down before you can actually use a website. That was a bad example on my part, yeah. And also things like titles. Why do you need my title? Why, you know, that's a bugbear of mine. Why does Ms. or Mrs.? What if I am something else? What if I am nothing?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's like for inclusion for everyone. Not everybody identifies as a man or a woman. So
Exactly.
you need that information and why and what are you doing with it? Something to consider. And maybe you leave people out if you ask for just, are you a woman or a man? Maybe you leave someone out. So yeah, it's something to consider. What do you need from your customers? And well, it can trigger anxiety or irritation if you ask too much.
Do you have?
And
sorry, Peter, go ahead.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say that once you start noticing the annoying aspects of forms, you don't stop. It's just you every time you go, you find a form. It's very rare that forms don't have things that you think, no, that shouldn't be there, or why are you putting it like that way, and so on. So yeah, sorry, Jan, carry on.
No worries. I was just going to ask Rian, how do we make sure that our projects are accessible? I would love for you to share some tools, because I'm such a nerd for the latest SaaS or the latest tool that I can add to my stack just to add complexity. What are some of your go-to tools that you use in your projects?
Well, the first thing is everything should work with a keyboard. So if I have to test a website, I always tab through it. And if I can access everything with a keyboard only. So everyone has a keyboard. Keyboard testing isn't that hard. You Google keyboard testing, you get all kinds of instructions. If you build something, you test it with a mouse, also test it with a keyboard if it works. And there are some automated testing tools. One is X, DevTools. X DevTools adds a tab to your inspector and gives you a report of the automated accessibility tests, like color contrast or semantic errors or WCAG violations. Note, automated tools only catch about 30% of all issues. So it's not like, oh, Lighthouse gives me 100%, my website is accessible. No, Lighthouse detects no issues. That's only about 30% of the issues they can detect automatically. Xcore, that's at the moment the best test tool for automated testing. Lighthouse runs on X. Microsoft Insights runs on X and X DevTools. So that's really at the moment the tool to go for. And then your keyboard. And what I also do is zoom in. Some people have to zoom in because they really cannot see very well. So they zoom in like 400%. You can do that with Command plus up to 400%. Is everything still readable, workable? It doesn't have to be pixel perfect, but are things not overlapping? If you have, for example, a static menu, does it take all the page and you cannot scroll anywhere, for example? That's.
I'm not sure if I want to see my site at 400% zoom. If I'm honest.
Command plus or Control plus, depending on your OS, and then up to 400%, and see what happens.
Surprisingly
that's WCAG success criteria, that you really have to zoom in up to 400%, and then it doesn't have to be really perfect, but you still must be able to read the text or use the menu, for example, or tap around.
Yeah.
So this, and you have all kinds of browser add-ons like HeadingsMap. Then you can have a heading structure of everything. Of a heading structure of your page. That's a really fast way to check.
That's interesting that you're bringing that up. I'm using that when I'm doing content creation and I have a blog post that I want to improve on. I use that plugin to just go through the structure of the blog post so that I have a framework for the new piece of content that I'm working on.
No, that's exactly what headings are for, a framework for your content.
Yeah.
It's like in WordPress admin. If you work in Gutenberg, there's the block editor. Sorry, there's also like an E.
The info
right?
box, yeah.
Yeah, and it gives you also information about the heading structure. Yeah, so there are, and also there is a tool that checks color contrast of your text. So something is also.
If automated tools are not the only way to test, well, if they're not that accurate, so what do you suggest that we do? Do we, well, I suppose that either you hire someone someone like you, an accessibility professional, or maybe we learn. What will we do? Train, because train designers, do you think? Or train developers to be accessible?
I train, what I, for example, did with the Gravity Forms team. I trained them in keyboard testing, in checking with X, but also with VoiceOver. That's a screen reader in Apple for the Mac. And then you can hear, for example, if you submit a form and you do that without a page reload, then someone who's blind must be informed about, hey, the form has been submitted, it was successful, or there are errors. And that can be announced, and that you can hear using a screen reader. So what I did is I give a training to the development team, and to the designer, and there's also Michelle, who is the QA lady, and I give her more training. So she's like, okay, this is finished, and then she did a thorough test. And after that, well, if she wasn't sure, she asked me, can you double check? So it's training. But keyboard accessibility testing is so important, because it works with keyboard, well, you almost get it all. So it must become second nature to you as a developer.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a developer, you are used to doing all types of shortcuts with the keyboard, because it's just so much faster than using the mouse.
Yeah. And you do a lot of the command line is also typing.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you're a designer, when I was using design tools like InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator a lot, I hardly ever touched the mouse, unless you're drawing, but in which case you don't have a mouse anyway, but that's a different story. So,
I've got a terrible memory for keyboard shortcuts. I have a very complicated mouse arrangement and also a trackpad as well. I use both because I keep forgetting what all the keyboard shortcuts are.
No, to me, it was like, I was like, and actually there was a study that I read that said that if you use shortcuts, you sort of lengthen your life, because you spend much less time actually working. No, honestly, shortcuts are the thing. You know, I used to be like a shortcut ninja. Now I do some different stuff. I don't do that kind of design anymore, but yeah, shortcuts. So keyboards, basically, keyboards. See, we're always finding reasons why accessibility makes good business sense, because it's one of the ways to make it palatable, to make people embrace it, is you tell them, you know, the purple pound, the 20% loss, it's a good way. That's picture science, so not, I wouldn't call it science, but yes, I'm sure it's a fact.
Sorry.
Yeah. So it's important, I think, to point that out. But I think that it's kind of a goal as well, that when you actually understand how if you find yourself in a disabled temporary disability, you will understand, even for a minute, what it's like for someone who's like that all the time. And you were saying earlier, Rian, that we've all been moaning that we can't leave the house, and so many disabled people are in that situation all the time. Or when they actually do leave the house, they have so many accessibility issues because there's no ramp for a wheelchair, or so many ways in which their mobility is limited. And if you break a leg, suddenly you'll find yourself being, you know, a champion of ramps, and you hadn't before, you hadn't thought about it, and now you're like, oh. So the same thing applies to the web. I think that if people just put themselves in the shoes of those, even for a minute, even with a child in your arms, you suddenly realize that you sleeping child, you realize how important captions are, you know. So I think
that's the truth.
way.
Yeah.
But regarding another way is education. Just educate yourself. It doesn't take that much. And here, let me please mention your project, Rian, the Ally Collective. Can I share the screen, Lee?
Yeah, it's A11Y, this Ally, and then -collective.com. A11Y is the abbreviation of accessibility. It starts with an A and ends with a Y, and in between there are 11 letters. So it's the same as internationalization and localization. It's, it's not an abbreviation. There's another word for it. Number, blah, 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 I don't know. I give training. We created a few, quite a lot of courses now.
I know that
courses for designers, one for content managers, one for developers, and there are 2 free courses, one tryout course with some courses from all other lessons from all other courses, and there is about the business case. So if you really want to make your
it's free,
right?
Yeah. So can I just say also, because another point that comes up often is that you can't have a pretty site if you accessible means ugly. No, it doesn't. I think this website accessible means pretty. This is such a lovely site. I love it. I love the colors.
Very talented designers. This one was made by Mitchell, and it's like poo in your face design. Yeah.
But I love it. I mean, the typography is spot on. So I wouldn't be able to say it doesn't look like it's an people say, oh, an accessible website is usually ugly, but that's not true at all. Look how nice this is. And the thing is, I will use it in my next typography workshop as an example of how to design with typography. There's very little else. If these images weren't there, it wouldn't make a difference. And it's perfectly designed just with typography, really. So, yes, so you can see that, I mean, the courses are accessible because they're all really nicely priced, and there are free ones as well. So there's no excuse.
It's like the online courses, so you can follow them. I give the a lot of videos in lessons, and below that the text is written out, and you get questions to go to the next lesson, and after that you get a certificate if you answered all the questions right. So you also have proof to show that you are actually followed the course.
We love that, don't we? I know. I love quizzes as well. So much. I love online learning for that reason. It gives me so much satisfaction to have that interaction with the site. Yeah. So definitely we recommend this.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's such a pleasure to even look at the site. And we're now, as Lee would say, we're nearly coming into land, aren't we?
That's right. Perfectly. Words out of my mouth.
Yes, we're reaching the top of the hour. No, I'm still here. So today we talked about accessibility, and it's a series on accessibility that we're doing here at Cloudways because it is so important. We're on a little bit of a mission to make it mainstream, and it's so great that you could come, Rian, because I know that that's your mission as well, as exemplified by the website. So what we talked about accessibility and why it matters, and it matters to everyone at any point. You don't need to be a website builder. If you have any web presence, even if you just post on Twitter or LinkedIn, you need accessibility. So alt tag your images, caption your videos, make the copy understandable, because there's also, in that sense, your copy needs to be accessible. Don't use jargon, make it all accessible. Then how to include accessibility from the beginning of a project, and that if you use, Rian said that if you use good, proper HTML and good design, you're probably at least half the way there, probably more, but it's a really good start. So train your teams and make sure that also your designers understand what the web is about. It's about being useful, not being arty. Then also accessibility is very important for SEO. The two things go hand in hand. So if you care about being found on Google, be accessible. And accessibility matters with your forms as well. Make your forms usable, and make sure that the error messages don't irritate and create anxiety. Only ask questions that you need. Don't ask questions that you don't need the answer to. Then how to check your own projects for accessibility. We looked at Axi. Axi, is that how you say it?
XDev tools.
XDev tools. And they are automated tools that are only accurate to a point. I think you said 30%, Rian. So it needs to be checked manually. Either hire a professional or, even better, train your team with the Ally Collective wonderful courses. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Well,
so I think, yes.
Well, this has been for me, an absolute eye-opener, pardon the pun, but this has been very, very useful. I think I'd just like to give a quick shout out to the tools that you mentioned, which is Axe, and the other tool, which is completely free, Test It With a Keyboard. So test it with a keyboard or use this tool, Axe. And also, of course, if you want to get some training, check out the free and or paid courses over at ally-collective.com. That is ally with 2 1s. Folks, I'd like to also quickly tell you about the agency partnership program. You can check that over on cloudways.com/en/agency. That will get you there, and you can find out about the amazing program that we're building. It's a valuable agency focus, that's probably you, program focused on giving you access to benefits that will increase your peace of mind, boost your productivity. I'm definitely reading this. And fuel your agency's growth. One day I'll learn that one off by heart. But basically, come and join the club. There are some amazing benefits. Find out if your agency can get into the agency partnership program over on cloudways.com/NEN/agency. I'd just like to remind you as well that you can check out the Ally Collective on allycollective.com. And finally, just to give a couple of shout outs to, where was it? I just need to find that banner. Where are you? And another shout out, to this. I've put a link here in the show notes. This was the project that you are a part of, isn't it, Rian, for Gravity Forms? And this is the accessibility knowledge base, which really deep dives, especially obviously for Gravity Forms. But be sure to check that out. I've put a link to that in the comments. So just look for my name in the comments of this live stream. There'll be a link there. So all that's left for us to do is to go around the room very quickly and find out the best way of connecting with each other, and then we shall wave goodbye. Rian, where's the best place that people can connect with you?
On Twitter.
On Twitter.
On Twitter. It's Rian Rietveld, my name. That's my handle.
Nice and easy. Jan, how about yourself?
For me, it's virtualsummitmastery.com.
You can find me on agencytrailblazer.com. How about you, Peter?
I'm a lurker on Twitter, but I am there, and all you need is my name, Peter, and then LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn at the moment very much. Yeah, Peter Neri. Awesome. You can't go wrong. There's only one.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great experience. What have you learned? Let us know. What were your biggest takeaways? Let us know. Again, if you got this far and you're watching the replay, let us know, because that means you're awesome. And folks, all that's left for us to do is give you a little wave goodbye. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.